Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. It's been no secret within the last 48 hours, Dan Lanning, the Oregon Ducks, kind of putting the college football landscape on notice. And it kind of got us thinking about is Oregon and Dan Lanning kind of building a dynasty in Eugene. And it kind of takes me back to the conversation that we had, a couple of weeks ago in terms of what head coaches across the country would you hire to take over your program? I took a lot of heat for having Dan Lanning at number 2 in the coaching rankings. And I think you're starting to see the reasoning why I think Dan Lanning is one of the best head coaches in the country. And you just look at this program and you kind of get the feeling that something special is cooking in Eugene. Want to get into a few of the reasons I look at this Oregon program under Dan Lanning and say, this program is building something special. Really excited to get into it. Before we do, and as always, would love to hear from you guys in the comments section, whether you're an Oregon fan, whether you're just a college football fan. And if you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And Dill, without further ado, let's get into, at least in my mind, the number one reason I'm believing in this Oregon program. That's long-term coach. You look at across the quote-unquote dynasties that we've seen across college football. I think you could say Dabo Swinney and Clemson, 10-plus year head coach, Nick Saban at Alabama, 10-plus year head coach, even Bobby Bowden at Florida State. You look at the dynasties that we've seen in college football, obviously Kirby Smart building one in Athens. One of the common denominators with all of those programs building those dynasties is you have a head coach that stays there for a long time and builds this program the way they want it. You look at Dan Lanning, it sounds like he's going to stay in Eugene for as long as Oregon's going to have him, which is going to be a very long time. If there is one place to start in terms of my confidence level with this Oregon program building the dynasty, is they got their head coach that's going to be there for what seems like 10-plus years.
And I think you kind of look in the past, I think that was obviously one thing that held Oregon back to an extent, as Chip Kelly didn't want to be there forever. He did leave once he started to get that thing really rolling, went off to the NFL, and obviously Mario Cristobal kind of makes a similar move. Not that I think he would have been Dan Lanning, or they probably upgraded a little bit, arguably.
I ain't arguing that. That was an upgrade.
So it's like obviously Mario Cristobal kind of wanted to take his job. And then I think Dan Lanning, when he maybe got his shot, he very, very aggressively shut that down, made a very strong, I think, commitment to Oregon. And I think, frankly, you look, I don't know why you necessarily wouldn't want to be in Oregon. It's a place that I think can win at the highest level. They have what they need.
Oh, man, and that's why Dan Lanning didn't leave. That's why Kalen DeBoer, and you look at this Oregon program and say it checks every single box that you want in a college football dynasty. I think that's why Dan Lanning is staying in Eugene. Now, the number 2 reason, it starts with talent acquisition. We talked about going back 2 years when Dan Lanning took the job at Oregon. One of the things we were most excited about is, yes, Dan Lanning did not have any head coaching experience, but we knew he could recruit his tail off. And you look at what Dan Lanning has done in the talent acquisition department over the last couple of years. There's not many programs that are doing it better. And the reason I'm calling it talent acquisition is, in the modern era of college football, talent acquisition means a couple of different things. One, you have to recruit the high school ranks, right? Every single program, with the transfer portal, without the transfer portal, every single program that wins at the highest level recruits the high school ranks exceptionally well. You go back to the 2024 class, they had number 4 class in the country. You look at 2025 right now, sitting at number 5. They're recruiting high school at the highest level, but then you look at what they're doing in the transfer portal, and you talk about so many head coaches that are, failing to adjust to the modern era of college football. That's not Dan Lanning in this Oregon program. Not only did they bring in the number 4 class in high school in 2024, they coupled that with the number 2 transfer portal class. You look at just the pure talent acquisition that's taking place in Eugene. There's not many programs that are doing it better than Dan Lanning and the Oregon Ducks.
And I think on top of that, guys aren't leaving. And I think that's going to be an incredibly important part of this is, again, you can bring in all this talent, but if you're revolving door and you're cycling in and out too quick, where the second guys aren't playing, they're gone, I think that's going to be a big issue for a lot of football teams, I think. And you look at Oregon, I mean, they have guys like Jury and Dickey and some of these really high-level guys who come in and don't really get to play immediately, don't really see the field, but guys are staying. I mean, they didn't really lose anybody I think was super meaningful to this football program, and a lot of them didn't play a whole lot of football.
I think that's a phenomenal point. You look at so many teams across the country, they lose guys to the transfer portal that were legitimate difference makers for their program. You look at Oregon, and not a shot at guys like Ben Roberts, but that's probably the biggest name that Oregon lost in the transfer portal. Now, I was pretty high on Ben Roberts going into year 3, but if you're telling me this Oregon team that did such good work in the transfer portal, that retained so much talent that could have gone to the NFL, and you tell me Ben Roberts was the best player on this Oregon team to hit the transfer portal, that's a massive win for this Oregon program. I think that's a really good point. Not only the talent acquisition, but keeping your roster together. Dan Lanning
even with guys who I don't know are going to play a lot this year, but are super talented. I mean, even that type of guy is staying. And that's like the type of guy I think maybe college football fans will just need to kind of get used to losing. You know what I'm saying? It's like, well, that's part of the game. It's like Michigan loses Keon Sapp to Alabama. Really talented player, wasn't necessarily slotted to be that full-time starter. They lose him. You don't really see a whole lot of those guys leaving Oregon, which again, you talk about things that are going to be increasingly important. I think
you look at Jurion Dickey, he's one of those guys that he had every reason in the world to go find another home. This is a guy that can play, and I don't even know if he's going to start for Oregon. I think he's going to play a lot. I think he's going to be a good football player, but you bring in Evan Stewart, you retain Tez Johnson. Jurion Dickey's a guy that starts for almost every Power 5 program across the country. He's not going to start at Oregon because of how good their wide receiver room is. He says, hey, I'm going to stay here. I'm going to trust the process, and he's going to hit the field, and we have full confidence that he's going to be a really good football player. I think number 3, in something that, at least in my mind, flies so low under the radar, I think that's the right term, coaching hires. You look at Nick Saban. What made Nick Saban so special for so long at Alabama is he would lose a lot of coaches, and that's just part of the business. When you have a really good college football program and you make really good hires, guys are going to move on, right? Kenny Dillingham, really good offensive coordinator, takes the Arizona State head coach job. That is part of being a really good program. What is crucial to maintaining that program is making good coaching hires replacing that. Nick Saban always did a phenomenal job. Kirby Smart does a phenomenal job. You look at Dan Lanning, he goes from Kenny Dillingham to Will Stein. I think Will Stein's one of the best offensive coordinators you see in the country. His ability to make these really good coaching hires, another thing that's given me a lot of confidence about this Oregon team over the next 10 years.
And I know you don't necessarily want to lose Kenny Dillingham, but in a sense you need to. You need Oregon to be an attractive place for the next up-and-coming coaches. You hear Nick Saban talk about it, I feel like, all the time. He's like, I didn't want to lose Dan or Kirby Smart. But when Kirby Smart takes the Georgia job, that makes my defensive coordinator spot the most attractive job. And you need your guys advancing. I think you're going to want to see Tosh Lupoy hopefully get a head coaching job in the next few years. Hopefully you see Will Stein get a head coaching job in the next few years, because then you can pretty much hire whoever you want who's on.
Yeah, if you're an offensive coordinator that's looking at, all right, where do I best advance my career? Oh, the coordinators at Oregon just all got head coaching jobs. Like, Will Stein's going to be a head coach in the next couple of years. I think all the Oregon fans are at peace at that. When Dan Lanning has to go out and hire his next offensive coordinator, it's a really easy sell job to come to Eugene. One, you got the talent to come in and win right away and put up good numbers. I think more importantly, all right, Kenny Dillingham got a head coach job. Will Stein got a head coach job. If I come be the OC at Oregon, I'm probably in line for a head coaching job over the next couple of years. That's what made coaching under Nick Saban so attractive, is you kind of knew that it was a massive stepping stone in terms of your next head coaching job. I think Dan Lanning's kind of building that pipeline with the coaching staff. And not to mention just some other, like Alik Terry. Name me how many better offensive line coaches you see in the country than a young guy like Alik Terry, who Dan Lanning kind of took a little bit of a flyer on. Not a ton of proven track record with Alik Terry. Shout out Wake Forest. I think that he's doing a phenomenal job hiring coaches. And the last thing that, again, doesn't get talked enough about, I feel like when you're evaluating head coaches, it's, are you winning football games and are you recruiting? I think one thing, especially in this modern era of college football with NIL playing a role, is the culture and having your ducks aligned. Ducks aligned, I think the Oregon fans would obviously like that. I'm not that funny. Thought that was kind of funny. Dill, you look at this Oregon program and say, it just feels like everyone from the head coaching to the player personnel to the players on the roster to the fan base, they're all just moving in the same step. There's a lot of chemistry within this program right now.
And that was kind of the thing when that Alabama job opened up, and obviously Dan Lanning's name shot to the top of the list, and you look, well, who's that upcoming coach? You certainly look to him. I kind of look, I think there was always that argument, like, why would you inherently need to leave Oregon? I know coaches have left, but it's not like those coaches have left and like flourished, or I don't see why Oregon inherently is a place that you can't win at the highest level. I mean, you talk about alignment, you talk about institutional support, you have it all there. You
All
have
there.
the backing from your boosters. They obviously ride with that program really hard. There's just, I don't really see what exactly is about it aside from maybe geography, but obviously they do a good job in their backyard. If you want to call California their backyard, like they have talent to pull from. And now with the new way of college football, it's just like, I don't think geography is the end all be all anymore, guys.
Dill, you talk about geography. Let's just take a look at this 2025 class right now. We talked about it yesterday. Texas, Florida, Kansas. You continue to scroll down. Obviously, we're doing a good job in California. You got another one in Florida, Illinois. You go to Missouri and land a guy like Isaiah Mose. They're doing it all over the country. Like geography is not playing a role in Oregon, not getting the talent that they need to. One thing that you noted before we went live that I thought was an excellent point. How about the fan base? Like this has got to be one. Not only do they support the fellas at a high level, we appreciate you guys, but I think a frustrating end of the 2024 season or 2023 season, excuse me, losing to Washington in the Pac-12 championship game. Did you hear any noise from this Oregon fan base? We got to fire this guy. We got to get rid of this coach. I didn't hear any of it. I think this Oregon fan base, the community around the team, believes in what's happening in Oregon. That is not something you can say for a lot of programs across the country.
And they don't question it. Like the second something bad happens at Texas, for example, Texas A&M might be as bad as it gets in terms of this, but whenever their coach, like something doesn't go perfect, it's immediately feels like half the fan base is like, get him out. The other half is keep him. And then you get into like this like warring tribe situation that just, again, I think is held, especially like Texas, back for a very long time. It just
not only with the fan base, but with the boosters too. I mean, we've heard the stories about what's going on behind the closed doors at Texas A&M. You talk about your Ducks being aligned, the institutional support, everything that is probably taking place behind closed doors. It feels like it's going in the right direction for this Oregon program. Dill, let's get to now the last question that we got to see from Oregon. It's two. It's one, can you win the big games? That's obviously the biggest. Number two, can you maximize the high school talent? Right, it is no secret Oregon is one of the most – they're swinging the heaviest sword right now in terms of recruiting the high school level. Can you see them maximize the talent that they have on the roster? I'll be the first one to say I certainly believe in it. We saw the player development that Dan Lanning had when he was the defensive coordinator at Georgia. I think 2024 is going to tell you a lot. And you have guys like Mateo Yu or Blake Purchase or Tatum Tuioti or guys like Jerion Dickey or Josh Connolly Jr., these young guys that were coveted out of high school. Can we see them get that player development that you need? You need talent acquisition to just get your foot in the door to compete at the highest level. The teams that bust through and win national championships, they take that high school talent, they develop it to the highest level. Can Oregon do that in 2024? That's going to be like the kind of last question we got to see checked off for Dan Lanning and the Oregon Ducks.
And he just hasn't been there long enough to do it. But I mean, you've obviously seen guys play really good under him at Georgia. And there's a reason Kirby Smart wanted him that bad to go to Georgia over Alabama. I think you guys know that Dan Lanning can do that. That will be the question, though. I think that's something like, yes, you need to recruit, you need to do all this other stuff. But at the end of the day, I think still arguably the most important part of college football is can you get the best out of your guys? And that's the one thing, just because he hasn't been there long enough to do it. That's the one thing we got to see. And
we have a lot of confidence.
There's not much left. There's not much left this Oregon, or there's not really any ceiling, I wouldn't say, on this Oregon
team. We have a lot of confidence that Dan Lanning can certainly do that. That's just kind of the last thing you want to see. And again, this season is going to tell us a lot about where this Oregon team is going. We believe in this program. We wanted to just kind of highlight like what's going on in Oregon. We talk about building dynasties. And we don't use the word dynasty lightly. Like we haven't seen a ton of dynasties in college football over the last 2 decades. I'd say Alabama and Kirby Smart and arguably Clemson, although they're kind of struggling to maintain that right now. Outside of those 3 programs, what team has emerged as like that 10-plus win team every single year? You haven't seen much. I think this Oregon team can be that kind of program under Dan Lanning. The boys are fired up. We're believers in Dan Lanning. We'll cut it there again. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.